Part 3. Territorial Pissings. Chapter 13. 1995. Rita hadn't died alone. According to the police report that Mac had managed to get me, she had been with her boyfriend and some of his friends when they were attacked. There was blood from several people, and the trailer had been ripped apart, but there hadn't been any bodies present. That gave me a trickle of hope, until I read on. A clear blood trail into the tidal marsh had led the police to the remains. Rita had been savaged. Parts of her body were missing entirely, and bites had been taken out of what remained. Birds were picking at her entrails when they'd found her. They hadn't recovered any other identifiable bodies, though judging by the amount of blood in the trailer, they expected to find several. They had found pieces. A man's finger, a foot, and... I stumbled hurriedly past Mac and vomited behind a nearby cedar. They'd found the gnawed leg of a small child, a baby, not far from Rita's mutilated remains. "Jesus, Red," Mac said, catching up to me. "It's horrible, I know, but pull yourself together. We've got to track this son of a bitch down, like old times." We'd been through a lot together. War, to start with, and years of cases. He wanted to be a cop himself when the war ended, but his injury hadn't allowed that. Instead, he'd talked me into going to business with him. Watson Investigations. I hadn't wanted my name on it. It was mostly divorce and fraud cases at first, but my nose has a way of leading me into trouble. Mac had known about my thing from what he'd seen in the war, but years of working together on strange cases had given him an idea that there were other things out there. Things that police weren't equipped to understand, much less deal with. For a few years, Mac and I had dealt with those things on our own, quietly. Sometimes we'd even gotten paid for it. My old partner was only seeing some new monster come to town, some boogeyman that he could talk me into hunting with him. That explained his attitude. He didn't really think for a second that it could have been me. He just saw a chance to play hero and recapture some of his lost youth. His faith in me was touching, but it made me feel even worse. I'd have to make him understand. I'd need his help. "Mac, no," I said. He cut me off. "I know I'm too old for this, but I'm not useless, damn it," he said. "I think that maybe it's time to bring Owen in on this. He was too young before, but he's been a cop for a long time now. I think if we laid it out for him, it would connect a lot of dots and he'd step up." "Mac!" He stopped. "You're not hearing me," I said. "I think I did this. I think I finally lost it, Mac. I killed that woman, and Jesus Christ, Mac, I killed that little boy." He looked at me with a patronizing expression and shook his head. "No. No, you didn't." "Yes, I did, Mac, I'm telling you." "Red," he said, "you were at your shack when I showed up. You were locked up like you always are. It's impossible. Frank, you're losing it. We need to talk about the drugs. I know you don't want to hear it, but they're becoming a real problem. You're confused." He couldn't understand. The drugs were the only reason this hadn't happened years ago. And now they weren't enough. "I broke loose, Mac," I said, "and the door was open when I woke up. I was loose." That made him stop and take a reflexive step away from me. He furrowed his brow and thought for a moment while Blue whined beside me and sniffed curiously at what had been my breakfast. "Okay," Mac said. "You're saying you remember killing her?" "Yes," I said. He raised an eyebrow. "Well, kind of. It isn't clear like that. It's more like I dreamt it, but that can be what it's like when I lose it. Especially if I'm... well, I trailed off. "If you're loaded," he said. I nodded. He was kind enough not to rub it in. "Think about it, Mac," I said. She pissed me off. I wanted to hurt her. Hell, I barely kept from ripping her head off when you sent me. Then I dream that I go and do just that, and wake up and find that I've broken free? You're telling me that you think it's more likely that somebody else like me, something we haven't seen for years, showed up and chose her at random on the same night that I broke free and wanted to go after her myself? Mac, I know you don't want to believe that I did this, and I appreciate that. But don't be an idiot. It was always just a matter of time. No, you think about it, Frank. He sounded angry. You think it makes more sense to think that you broke loose in your sleep, ran the 7 or 8 miles to that crappy trailer park, and then found your way back home and into bed when you were too loaded to even remember doing it? Sounds to me like you're the idiot. You don't understand, I said, and it was true, he didn't. He couldn't. He hadn't lived with this thing the way that I had. He didn't know how strongly instinct could drive me, how the wolf could take over. He didn't know how many times I'd done something and had to piece together what I had done after the fact. The wolf returning to its den after hunting would be simple instinct. I need to be alone. We didn't speak as we returned to the Blazer, and I started on the way home. He didn't believe me. There was no way I could talk him into helping me with what I had to do next. I do understand, he said as we arrived at my trailer. I understand more than you think. You're not the only one who's done things you regret. What, you think this is the same? This isn't me not keeping it in my pants, Mac. He looked at me like I'd slapped him. I'd never judged him for the failure of his marriage, never said anything. Who was I to judge? I'm just saying that I know who you are, Frank, he said through gritted teeth. No, Mac, you don't. Maybe you never did, I said. Bullshit, he said quietly. You're my friend. No, Mac, I said. I'm not. Get out of here. Fine, he said. There's no talking to you when you're like this. Call me when you calm down and we'll figure out what to do next. I already knew what to do next. He got in his shitty car and backed out of my driveway without saying anything more, but I could tell that I'd hurt him. Good. It would be easier for him that way. Blue grunted at my side and gave me a queer look. Don't you start, I said. It's for his own good. I went inside, loaded the pipe from the contents of the stolen gym bag, and started to plan how I'd kill myself. It's no simple thing to kill a garrote. Not impossible, but far from easy. There are a few foolproof options, but ripping my own head off or cutting my own heart out without anybody to assist me didn't seem likely. I'd had a half-thought-out romantic notion of kneeling like a samurai and accepting my death with honor while Max stoically swung the axe. That wouldn't be happening. I lit the pipe and took a small hit, enough to calm my nerves and settle my guts without putting me under. People who want to put one of us down always think immediately of a silver bullet, but that's an invention of Hollywood. Silver doesn't do me any special harm. The silver medal of St. Francis that I still wore was proof of that. Iron. That was the trick. Cold iron. Plain old steel. Silver would have been more exotic, but plain iron is harder to recover from than anything else I've encountered, except perhaps fire or salt. I don't know why exactly, but being pumped full of lead has never been as painful or as difficult to heal as being cut with a simple steel blade. I was vaguely aware of Evelyn's ghost sitting on her chair, staring at me as she always did. She was less solid than she had been during the full moon, fading like the wolf spirit within me in accordance with the cycle of the moon. I ignored her. The dope helped. Steel-jacketed bullets, that's what I'd need. They weren't especially common outside of the military, but they weren't impossible to come by either. I'd made it a point to keep some near at hand. A steel-jacketed .45 round to my temple should do the trick. Then again, it might not. I'd recovered before from things that I'd been sure would end me. A botched suicide attempt would only release the wolf to go on another rampage. I didn't want to come back to my senses days later to find that I'd killed another woman. Or eaten another baby. Jesus Christ. If there was anything in my stomach, I'd have been sick again. No. To be certain of success, I'd have to wait until the wolf was at his weakest. I'd have to wait until the new moon. Just as the wolf is strongest at the moment of the full moon, next to impossible to hold at bay, during the dark of the new moon, it is practically dormant. I'd taken injuries before during the new moon and been worried that I might not survive long enough to heal. Those had been close calls. Waiting for the right time would be the key, but if I put a steel bullet into my head at the moment of the new moon, there'd be no way to fail. The way I was feeling, I'd have pulled the trigger that very night if I could be certain that it would work. But to do the thing right, I'd have to wait about 10 days. Fine. It was probably for the best. I had affairs to put in order. I had to be sure that the dogs would be looked after. I couldn't just abandon them. And there was Maggie. I'd been dreading the day that I'd have to live without her, and that day seemed to have been drawing near. I was relieved that I wouldn't have to face losing her. Thankfully, she wouldn't have to deal with the same pain when I was gone. She wouldn't even know the difference. If she had been in her right mind, I could never have done it. I could never have hurt her like that. But for once, her lost memories seemed a mercy. Still, I'd have to say goodbye. There was no question. Only 10 days. It seemed like a nice, round number. A countdown. For the first time in years, I felt that I had something to look forward to. I had 10 days to live.